The clock on the wall reads 2:53 p.m. Marta, 60s, wearing a headscarf, adjusts it for the 10th time. Her hands tremble slightly, not from the humming air conditioning, but from anxiety. She clutches a yellowed envelope, its edges worn from time and handling. Inside is a resignation letter she hasn't had the courage to deliver. The room is filled with people, all waiting their turn. Men in suits impatiently check their phones, women flip through magazines without really reading them, and children dart between the blue plastic chairs until scolded by exhausted parents. Marta sits in the corner chair, the same one she's chosen every Monday at 3 p.m. for 3 months. From here, she can observe without being noticed, a privilege she's learned to value since chemotherapy drastically changed her appearance. The hair was the first to go, then the eyelashes, the eyebrows, and with them, a part of the confidence she'd built over 42 years. Marta was, or was, an HR manager at a mid-sized company. She knew every employee's name, their families, their struggles, their dreams. She organized birthday parties, mediated conflicts, offered a shoulder to cry on. But now, sitting in this plastic chair, with her scarf slightly askew, she feels like a shadow of her former self. The receptionist, a young woman with bleach blonde hair and perfectly manicured nails, looks up from her computer screen and shouts a name that echoes through the room. Mr. Anthony Silva! An elderly man rises with difficulty, leaning on a dark wooden cane. Marta watches him slowly walk to the counter, where the receptionist waits with barely concealed boredom. "You're late," the receptionist says, without looking up from her paperwork. "Your appointment was for 2:30. "I'm sorry, dear," the man replies, his voice slow and respectful. "The bus was delayed and—" "It doesn't matter," she interrupts, tapping her nails on the desk. "You'll have to reschedule. The doctor can't see you today." Marta sees the man's face fall. He holds a folder to his chest as if it contained fragile treasures. "But I came from so far. I really need to speak with the lawyer. It's about my late wife's pension. Without that money, I can't pay the rent." The receptionist sighs dramatically. "Sir, there's nothing I can do. The rules are clear. You're late, you missed your appointment. End of story." A heavy silence falls over the room. A few people look up from their phones and magazines, but quickly return to pretending not to notice. Marta feels her heart quicken, not because of her own situation, but because of the injustice she witnesses. She recognizes the expression on the man's face. It's the same one she sees in the mirror every morning. Helplessness, powerlessness in the face of a system that seems to have lost its humanity. Mr. Silva remains there for a few seconds, as if hoping someone will change their mind. When nothing happens, he slowly turns and walks back toward the exit. Marta sees his stooped back, trembling shoulders, the way he clutches the folder. In that moment, she recognizes something familiar in the man's posture. The same vulnerability she feels every time she goes to the hospital for chemotherapy. The same feeling of being at the mercy of strangers' goodwill. The door closes behind him with a dry sound, and life in the waiting room continues as if nothing happened. The receptionist resumes typing, people resume their hushed conversations, and the clock keeps ticking. But Marta can't take her eyes off the empty chair where the man had sat moments before. She remembers her own recent experience at the hospital. She'd been 15 minutes late for a crucial appointment, the day she received the results of her latest tests. The traffic was impossible, the rain had slowed everything down, and she'd run through the hospital corridors with her scarf slipping from her head. When she finally reached the doctor's office, breathless and trembling, the nurse greeted her with a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Marta, so glad you made it. The doctor's expecting you. We know it's not easy to get here in this weather." That kindness, that simple understanding, had meant more than any medicine. In that moment, Marta didn't feel like just a number in line, but a person who deserved care and respect, regardless of her appearance or circumstances. The memory brings her back to the present, where her name has just been called. Mr. Marta Davis. The receptionist's voice sounds different this time, more professional, almost cordial. Marta stands, adjusts her scarf once more, and walks to the counter. "Good afternoon," she says, her voice soft but firm. "Yes, of course," the receptionist replies, now smiling. "Dr. Henry can see you now." Marta nods but doesn't move immediately. She looks at the chair where Mr. Silva had sat, then at the other people still waiting. Finally, her eyes fix on the young woman's face. "Excuse me," Marta says, her voice calm but determined. "I'd like to know if there's still a possibility for the gentleman who was here a little while ago to be seen today." The receptionist furrows her brow. "Which gentleman?" "Mr. Silva. He was only a few minutes late." "Oh, him," the young woman interrupted dismissively. "No, there are no more appointments available today. He should have been on time." Marta felt something ignite within her. Not anger, but a resolve she hadn't felt in months. "He can have my appointment," she said simply. The receptionist stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "I beg your pardon?" "My appointment can be rescheduled. His seemed more urgent." "But you have a scheduled appointment. You can't just—" "Yes, I can," Marta said with a gentle smile. "It's my choice." A low murmur began to ripple through the waiting room. A few people looked up, interested in the conversation. Marta realized she had become the center of attention, but strangely, it didn't bother her. For the first time in months, she felt she was doing something that truly mattered. "But he's already left," said the receptionist, clearly bewildered. "Oh, him," the young woman interrupted dismissively. "No, there are no more appointments available today. He should have been on time." Marta felt something ignite within her. Not anger, but a resolve she hadn't felt in months. "He can have my appointment," she said simply. The receptionist stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "I beg your pardon?" "My appointment can be rescheduled. His seemed more urgent." "But you have a scheduled appointment? You can't just—" "Yes, I can," Marta said with a gentle smile. "It's my choice." A low murmur began to ripple through the waiting room. A few people looked up, interested in the conversation. Marta realized she had become the center of attention, but strangely, it didn't bother her. For the first time in months, she felt she was doing something that truly mattered. "Mr. But's already left," said the receptionist, clearly bewildered. "Then perhaps we could call him, or send someone to get him," Marta suggested. "He can't have gone far." A middle-aged woman sitting near the counter stood up. "I saw him at the bus stop," she said. "He was still there when I passed the window a few minutes ago." Marta smiled at her, a genuine smile that lit up her pale face. "Thank you," she said. Then she turned back to the receptionist. "See, there's still time." The young woman behind the counter seemed lost, as if she had never encountered a similar situation. She looked at Marta, then at the woman who had offered to help, and finally at the group of people who were now watching the scene with renewed interest. Just then, a deep, calm voice echoed through the room. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned to see a gray-haired man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. He had emerged from one of the offices and was walking toward the counter with firm but calm steps. Marta recognized him immediately. It was Dr. Henry, the lawyer she was supposed to meet. "Dr. Henry," stammered the receptionist, "this lady wants to give up her appointment for the gentleman who was here a short while ago." The lawyer stopped in front of Marta and studied her for a moment. His eyes, though serious, held a kind light that she immediately recognized. "You're Marta Davis?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice firm. "And you'd like to give up your appointment for Mr. Silva?" "Yes," she repeated. "He seemed to need it more than I did." Dr. Henry was silent for a few seconds, as if processing not only the words but the meaning behind them. Finally, he turned to the receptionist. "Carla," he said, his voice gentle but authoritative, "please go to the bus stop and bring Mr. Silva back. Tell him we were able to fit him into the schedule." The receptionist opened her mouth to protest, but the lawyer's gaze made her change her mind. "Yes, doctor," she murmured, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. Dr. Henry then turned to Marta. "And as for you, would it be possible for us to talk right now? I have a few minutes free before my next appointment." Marta nodded, but before following him, she looked around the room. People were no longer pretending not to pay attention. Some were smiling, others seemed thoughtful. A child who had stopped running tugged on her mother's skirt and whispered something in her ear. The woman looked at Marta with an expression of quiet admiration. In the office, Dr. Henry offered her a comfortable chair and sat behind his desk. "Now," he said, "tell me, what brought you here?" Marta took a deep breath and began her story. She talked about the illness, the treatment, the changes in her appearance and self-esteem. She talked about how invisible she felt at work, how her colleagues treated her with a mixture of pity and discomfort. She explained about the resignation letter she had been carrying for months, about the fear of not being able to find another job because of her condition. The lawyer listened in silence, making occasional notes. When she finished, he put his pen down and looked at her. "Mrs. Davis," he said, "what you did in the waiting room, that tells me a lot about who you are." She lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "It wasn't a big deal." "It was," he interrupted gently. "You demonstrated a rare quality, genuine compassion. In a world where people are increasingly focused on themselves, you chose to see beyond your own needs." Marta looked up and met his smile. "You know," he continued, "I've worked in employment law for over 20 years. I've seen it all: discrimination, harassment, injustices of all kinds. But I've also seen extraordinary people who transform workplaces just by being who they are." He leaned forward slightly. "Have you considered not handing in that resignation letter? Have you considered that you might be exactly the kind of person your company needs to keep?" Marta felt tears prick her eyes. "But I'm not the same person I was before." "No," he agreed, "you're better." From outside, they could hear voices in the waiting room. The receptionist had returned with Mr. Silva. The lawyer smiled. "Let's solve this together," he said, "your employment issue, and we'll help the gentleman out there too." Meanwhile, in the waiting room, something had changed. Mr. Silva was back in his seat, his eyes brimming with gratitude. The receptionist, who had previously shown only irritation, now seemed more attentive, more human. Some people had started spontaneous conversations, as if Marta's gesture had broken an invisible barrier that had kept everyone isolated in their own concerns. A young woman holding a baby offered Mr. Silva a biscuit. A businessman put away his phone and asked if anyone needed help. A teenager gave up her place in line for an elderly woman who had arrived slowly. It was as if a small pebble had been thrown into a lake, creating ripples that expanded in ever-widening circles. When Marta left the doctor's office an hour later, she found a scene completely different from the one she had left. Mr. Silva was chatting animatedly with others, his briefcase now open on his lap, displaying photos of his late wife. The receptionist was genuinely smiling as she assisted clients, taking time to explain procedures and offer help. You know, sometimes we need stories like this to remind us that there is still kindness in the world. If you believe in the power of small gestures to transform lives, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to receive more heartwarming stories that make us reflect on what truly matters in life. Dr. Henry walked Marta to the door. "Mrs. Marta," he said, "I'd like to make you an offer. I need someone to work at the reception of my office. Someone who understands that being a lawyer isn't just about laws, but about people. Interested?" Marta stared at him, surprised. "You're exactly what I'm looking for," he said. "Someone who sees beyond appearances, who understands that behind every case there is a human story." She held the envelope with her termination letter, which now seemed absurdly irrelevant. I would love to," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Great," said the lawyer. "You can start next week." As Marta walked to the exit, she stopped to say goodbye to Mr. Silva. He got up with difficulty and held her hands in his.
"My dear," he said, his voice trembling, "what you did today, it restored my faith. I haven't seen so much kindness in a person in a long time." Marta smiled, feeling that something inside her had healed, not her body, which was still fighting the disease, but her soul, which had rediscovered its purpose. "It wasn't a big deal," he said, echoing her earlier words. "It was everything," he replied, squeezing her hands a little tighter. When Marta left the building, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She walked to the bus stop where she had met Mr. Silva hours before, but now she felt like a completely different person. Not because her appearance had changed, the scarf still covered her bald head and her skin was still pale from the treatment, but because she had rediscovered something she thought she had lost, the ability to make a difference. In her pocket, instead of the termination letter, she now carried Dr. Henry's business card and the promise of a new beginning. But more importantly, she carried the certainty that small gestures of kindness still have the power to transform the world. While waiting for the bus, she thought about her new role.
Would she now be the one to receive people in moments of vulnerability, who could offer not only information about legal processes, but also an understanding smile, a word of encouragement, a gesture of humanity in a world that sometimes seemed to have forgotten what that meant? The bus arrived, and Marta climbed the steps with firm steps. Through the window, she saw the building where it all had begun. At the entrance, people were still coming and going, each carrying their own stories, their own fears and hopes. She smiled, knowing that next week she would be on the other side of the counter, ready to receive those stories with the same care and compassion she had shown that day. Because she had learned that even when we feel weakest, we still have the power to choose how we treat each other. And that, sometimes, it's precisely when we are facing our own battles that we can see the struggles of others more clearly. On the way home, Marta threw the envelope with the termination letter in the trash. She didn't need it anymore. She had found something far more valuable, a new purpose, and the certainty that, no matter how difficult our situation, there is always room for kindness. 3 months later, Dr. Henry's office had become known not only for its legal competence, but also for the humanity with which it treated its clients. Marta, now with hair starting to grow back, received each person as if they were the most important in the world. She had a special gift for making people feel seen, heard, and respected. Mr. Silva became a regular visitor, no longer as a client, but as a friend. He used to show up on Friday afternoons, always with a homemade cake or flowers from the garden he cultivated at home. He and Marta had developed a deep friendship based on the mutual understanding that life can be difficult, but it gets easier when we find people who genuinely care about each other. The building's receptionist, Carla, had also changed. Inspired by Marta's example, she began to treat clients with more patience and kindness. She discovered that when she offered a genuine smile and showed real interest in people, her work became more rewarding and the environment more pleasant for everyone. Marta's story had spread quietly throughout the building and neighborhood, not as a legend or a heroic tale, but as a silent example that kindness still exists and can be contagious. People who had witnessed or heard about her gesture began to act differently in their own lives, creating a wave of small acts of generosity that spread like ripples in the water. On an autumn afternoon, while organizing her office files, Marta found a letter addressed to her. It was from a woman who had been in the waiting room that memorable day. The letter read, "Dear Marta, you probably don't remember me, but I was there the day you gave up your appointment for the elderly gentleman. I was going through a very difficult time in my life, feeling invisible and unimportant. When I saw what you did, I realized that there is still kindness in the world. Your attitude inspired me to make changes in my own life. I went back to volunteering at a shelter, started devoting more time to my family,
and learned to see the people around me with more compassion. I wanted you to know that your simple gesture had a much bigger impact than you can imagine. Thank you for reminding me of what truly matters." Marta carefully folded the letter and put it in her purse. She hadn't made that gesture seeking recognition or gratitude, but knowing that she had inspired another person to be kinder to herself and others was an unexpected and precious gift. That night, while preparing dinner in her small kitchen, Marta reflected on the changes in her life. The illness was still there, demanding continuous care and treatment, but it no longer defined her. She had learned that our true identity doesn't reside in our physical appearance or our health situation, but in how we choose to treat each other, especially during the most difficult times. Looking out the kitchen window, she saw her neighbors returning from work, children playing in the street, ordinary people living their ordinary lives. But now she saw something that had previously escaped her. Each of these people carried their own struggles, their own fears, their own hopes. Marta smiled, adjusting the headscarf she still wore, not out of shame anymore, but by choice. She had learned that true beauty lies not in physical perfection, but in the ability to see beyond appearances and connect with the humanity of others. And that, sometimes, when we are at our most vulnerable, is when we can offer our greatest contribution to the world. The last thing she did before going to sleep was reread the letter from the stranger, not for the gratitude expressed, but for the reminder that we never fully know the impact of our actions. A simple gesture, a kind word, a moment of compassion can be exactly what someone needs to rediscover their own strength and kindness. And so, in the quiet of her home, Marta fell asleep with the certainty that she had found something far more valuable than the appearance she had lost or the health she was struggling to maintain. She had found her purpose, to be a living reminder that, even in the darkest moments, there is always room for the light. And that light, once ignited, has the power to illuminate far more than we can imagine. In the end, Marta's story wasn't about heroism or extraordinary sacrifice. It was about the simple, everyday choice to see the other as a human being worthy of respect and care. A choice that, when made sincerely, has the power to transform not only the life of the recipient of the kindness, but also the life of the giver, creating a virtuous circle of compassion that silently expands throughout the world, one person at a time.